can't do it without hearing the comments that might be forthcoming. All
Yes.
deserved.
Okay. Good morning. Today is Tuesday, January 11th. It's 10:18 a.m. and this is the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. We're picking up our work from last week, and sometimes I call it setting the table. So a number of bills have all come in and continue to come in. So we're doing introductions, some brief, some sort of annotated, but to basically have everything out in front of us. So as we make our choices and then in the coming week about our follow-on work and priorities, we all know what's entirely available. I was thinking that one of the sort of information is our currency. So one thing I'll ask everyone, this is a question I bring up from time to time, maybe not often enough, but to help us work well as a committee, I just keep pushing back to the committee to say, what questions do you have and from whom would you like to hear? So as we go through this, I work on an agenda with Jude. Sometimes others chip in, but I always want to make sure that everyone knows our witness list and the agendas. Certainly open to having you all help expand that. So again, what questions do you have? From whom do we need to hear? And with that, I'd like to follow up on the first of those. Then it is, we'll do S201 first. Senator McCormick, that is your bill. If you could give us a brief why you're introducing, and then Mr. O'Grady will just take us through the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I often explain to people that the legislators themselves are generally big picture people, and then we trust staff to deal with the details. So I'll give the big picture. People have been trapping wild animals for their furs for millennia. And as recently as my time in the Senate, one of my colleagues said that he trapped for the purpose of raising the money to buy his kids shoes. But no one these days has to trap for money, for income. There are other ways to get your kids shoes. Trapping is a sport, and it is a form of recreation. It is optional, and it is cruel. Essentially, the way it works is, well, as the word trap implies, is a leg hold trap grabs the animal by the leg. The animal cannot escape. The animal does not have an intellectual grasp of what is happening to him or her, but the animal knows that he or she is trapped. And there are, and you've all seen the pictures. You've all seen the videos. You've all heard the stories. The thing is, they're true. The issue does not go away. And I must admit that we are up against what some people will wave a flag of traditional lifestyle. And that's true, unfortunately, but it is a cruel, unnecessarily cruel lifestyle. And values do change over time. And in my view, the time came a long time ago to stop what is essentially gratuitous recreational cruelty. I was a Boy Scout. Boy Scout handbook told you how to make a snare, as it told you how to start a fire and improvise a shelter in the wilderness. The idea of getting out there and doing this primitive stuff, getting in touch with your ancestors, it's attractive, but it's essentially a romantic rationalization that just ignores the fact that it's also gratuitously cruel. And so I am proposing that the state of Vermont join the several other states, including Arizona, New York, New Jersey. There are 11 other states that where leg hold traps are illegal. We would not be on our own, and we would not be out ahead. maybe ahead of the majority of states, but would not be alone. There are a substantial number of states who have chosen to outlaw this gratuitous cruelty. So I'll hand it over to Michael. Certainly, and also I'm hearing from any number of supporters who are eager to testify if the committee wants to pursue the bill.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick clarifying question. So overall, you're aiming to ban leg hold traps, but trapping using other techniques would still be allowed for by the bill. Is that correct?
Well, Michael will get into the details
Okay.
of how it all actually works.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Senator McCormick. Mr. O'Grady, if you could walk us through S-151, please.
Sure. So before I start the walkthrough of the text, just some background information. This is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Counsel. So currently, trapping is regulated by statute and by the rule of the Fish and Wildlife Board. A trapping license does entitle the holder to take animals with traps, and fur bearing animals shall not be taken unless in accordance with the provisions of statute or the rules of the board. Now, there are specific provisions related to types of trapping. First, under statute 10 VSA 4706, I think, snaring is prohibited. And then under the rules of the board, the use of toothed leg hold traps is currently prohibited as well. This bill generally would prohibit the use of all leg hold traps for trapping. Other traps, as the chair just referenced, cage and box traps, live beaver traps, or common rat and mouse traps would still be allowed. So it's not every single type of trap. It is specifically leg hold traps. So with that, I will ask if there are any questions, and then I will walk through the bill.
And thank you. And as we get ready to do that walkthrough, I misspoke a moment ago. I said S-151 and it's S-201. I don't want to be confusing committee members or people who are following if you're looking for the bill we're about to go through. Thank you. Yeah. Please continue. Thanks.
I am going to share my screen. That did not work. Let me try again.
There we go.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yes.
So this is S-201. It relates to fish and wildlife trapping and leg hold traps. The first section amends 10 VSA 4707. There isn't a ton of statutory provisions around trapping. This is a provision about how currently a person who intends to set a trap for any animal on the property of another shall notify the owner of that property of his or her intention to set the trap. This would add to that section the definition of what a leg hold trap is on page 1, line 12. A device designed to close on the foot or leg of an animal with enough force to hold the animal until the person tending the trap returns. So that would include both padded and unpadded steel-jawed leg hold style traps. So toothed or untoothed, padded or unpadded. And then a leg hold trap shall not include cage and box traps, suitcase type live beaver traps, or common rat and mouse traps. And then it provides the prohibition.
Sorry, Mr. O'Grady, can I ask a quick question while we're right there? Padded and unpadded, steel jawed. So I'm just reading like sort of from an editor's point of view, are these types of traps only made of steel, and that's why it says steel jawed, or are there another kind of leg hold trap that's not steel? I'm just trying to make sure.
They're there likely are other traps that are made of other material. But remember, the line 14 says it includes, so it's includes but not limited to.
Okay,
And
thank you.
the major the definition of force is a device designed to close on the foot or leg of an animal with enough force to hold the animal. So the definition is not specific to steel, but when you look at a lot of the provisions around the country addressing trapping, they do specifically reference steel jawed leg hold style traps.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
okay. Then you get to the prohibition. No person shall take or attempt to take an animal with the use of a leg hold trap. The term take is defined in statute. It includes to kill, to wound, to harass, to injure. So that is what is being prohibited. And that is the main statutory change, the statutory prohibition. And then you come to the penalty provision for trapping in violation of that statutory section I just walked you through. So remember that fish and wildlife violations, they come in two parts. You get a point assessed against your license, and then certain other fish and wildlife violations have specific monetary penalties. Not everyone does. If there isn't a specific monetary penalty, it defaults to a default penalty. So this is just a specific monetary penalty. It says a person who violates 4707 by using or attempting to use a leg hold trap to take wildlife shall be fined not less than 200 or more than 500 or imprisoned for not more than 60 days or both for a first offense. For a second or subsequent offense, a person shall be fined not less than 500 or more than 1,000 or imprisoned for not more than 6 months or both. So this would be the specific monetary penalty. The point assessment, there is no specific point assessment included. So it defaults to the 5-point assessment. Any fish and wildlife violation that doesn't have a specific point reference defaults to 5 points. So this would be a 5-point violation with the specific monetary penalties for the first and then for the second offense.
Are these levels kind of a standard, the bracketing 2 to 500, 60 days, et cetera?
They're consistent with other monetary penalties for fish and wildlife violations of this type.
Thank you. Any committee questions before we go on?
I do want to note a drafting issue. So on page 1, it says no person shall take or attempt to take an animal. That really probably should be a wild animal or wildlife on line 18. That is my error.
Okay, thank you.
Then you go to section 3. This is the rule for fur-bearing species. The bill will amend the rule directly. Someone might ask you, can the General Assembly amend rules directly? Well, in this case, the fish and wildlife rules were enacted by statute, and the authority to amend those statutory rules was given to the board and was also given to the General Assembly. So the General Assembly has specific statutory authority to amend the Fish and Wildlife Board rules. So the first thing that's being done is in section 44 of the Fish and Wildlife Board rules, definition of leg hold trap is added. It is the same that you just looked at for statute. And then in the restrictions under section 44, I referenced earlier that toothed foothold traps are already prohibited. So in that section, I'm amending it. The bill would amend that section to say person shall not use leg hold traps or snares when trapping under this section. And then the reference to how to set a foothold trap would be struck because it no longer would be allowed. And the bill would take effect on passage.
Great. Can you remind me and maybe the committee too about you had mentioned that you need, I think you alluded to needing permission in order to set a trap on someone's property. Where is that sort of permission to trap in statute or rule?
It's right here on page 2 on current 10 VSA 4707. Person who intends to set a trap for any animal on the property of another shall, prior to setting the trap, notify the owner of the property of his or her intention to set the trap and the prospective location of the trap. The owner of the property may at any time refuse to grant permission to set a trap or revoke the permission it previously granted.
Okay, and the reason that it is phrased that way, I mean, basically notification as opposed to requesting permission, does that fall back to the basic premise that the wildlife of Vermont is owned by all Vermonters? So it starts out with access, but you're notifying, and then the property owner then can revoke the access.
Yep. So the Vermont Constitution, Chapter 2, Section 67 says the inhabitants of the state have liberty in seasonal times to hunt and fowl on the lands that they hold, and on any other lands not enclosed under proper regulation by the General Assembly. So the Constitution gives people, the public, citizens, the right to hunt and fish on anyone's land if that land is not enclosed. In addition, the Constitution gives the General Assembly the ability to set restrictions on hunting and fishing. So what this 4707 does, it says you can trap on other people's lands, but you have to notify them, and they can prohibit you from trapping on their land. So it's consistent with the constitutional authority of the General Assembly to set restrictions on that land. In addition, in another section of law, 10 VSA 5201, the public property owners have the right to post their land to prohibit anyone from hunting or fishing on their land.
Okay.
And what's the penalty?
The penalty for
Ignoring, if someone doesn't grant you permission and says no, and they hunt, what's the penalty?
that's a good question. So for traps on notice, it's a 10-point uniform violation, 10-point assessment. And then I think it would default to the default penalty, which is $1,000, up to $1,000.
Senator McDonald.
Is that a he said or she said violation? I notified them, and they and the landowner says, and I told them they couldn't do it. Or is that what it rests upon? Unposted land, you go and notify the landowner. The landowner says no, and you trap anyway. We're now down to what are the facts in the case? Was there actually a request, and was there a denial of the request?
Sure. So the wardens will use their law enforcement authority to gather evidence. Maybe the property owner sent an email or otherwise documented the notice, sent a letter, etc. So there will be investigation.
So,
Thank you.
Senator Westman, please.
so when landowners, my experience is when landowners request, they usually have that request and it's granted. those that are want to adhere to the law and are up on the law always have a written request form, and they carry that with them. And I've been told, and I don't know if this is true, that they are supposed to have that with them if the land they're hunting on is posted.
I don't know if it's required. I think it's a good practice recommended by
Okay.
the department.
All right, I'm just,
I can
don't-
go check Rule 44 for you.
yeah, I don't know, but that's what the practice amongst those people that that come and ask and want to be within the law. That's my experience with the practice, but I don't know, you know.
I think I'm not seeing it in Rule 44. Doesn't mean it's not there. I'm just not seeing it. I think
Okay.
it's more of a good practice recommended by the department.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so just so since we regulate hunting and fishing, trapping a little differently than some things, there's this mixture of both statute and rules. So in this case, help me keep track of it, where how we're using rule versus statute to accomplish the goal.
In this bill specifically?
Yeah. Are we,
Okay. Well, the Fish and Wildlife Board has been granted authority to adopt by rule the means and manner of taking of wildlife, including fur-bearing animals, and including through the use of trapping, and they have done so. However, statute trumps rule. So if you were to go forward with this, the statutory prohibition would control. It's not as if the board could attempt to adopt rules that would allow leg hold traps. And I want to distinguish this from the current prohibition on snaring, because a couple of years ago, LCAR at least faced the question of whether or not certain devices called cable restraint devices could be used because they were allegedly distinct from a snare. But there was no definition of a snare. So then it became a question of legislative intent. You're not walking into that issue here because you define what a leg hold trap is. And so the statutory prohibition would control. There is no opportunity for the board to define it in a different way. So the statute would control, but the rules are generally what the hunting and fishing community use to govern themselves. And so even though the statute controls, you probably want to include in the rules itself the prohibition so that the community who uses the rules as their guidance has it in their rules to regulate them. For example, the prohibition on snares is in statute. The prohibition on snares is in rule as well.
okay. So if we were, that sounds like good practice, sort of practically speaking, has the legislature traditionally explicitly asked for that to happen, or just the Fish and Wildlife, sort of on behalf of the community, trapping community or hunting community that it writes the rules for, just does that as a matter of course?
It's not, I mean, the board is advised by the department, and it's my experience that the department advises the board to include those statutory prohibitions in the rules, so it's clear. Not every single statutory prohibition or regulation is in the rules, but many of them are.
Okay, great. Any other, one last quick question from me. You had referenced, or Senator McCormick referenced, 11 other states have prohibitions of this sort in terms of the use of a device like this. Could you get us a list of those states, please?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Senator Campion?
I just want to thank Senator McCormick for bringing this forward. I'm hoping that this committee will take a good look at this session, hopefully before we adjourn for town meeting week. I also have a bill that would somewhat connect to this. This is looking at the Fish and Wildlife Board and how they operate and some of their rules and regulations. So I'm hoping that this seems like something we've talked about for a long time, and I'm hoping that maybe we can take some steps forward to accomplishing the goals that are outlined.
Okay.
So thanks, Senator McCormick.
Thank you both. And to your point, Senator Campion, just as a note to the committee, in case you haven't looked at Friday's agenda, we're basically reintroducing Senator Campion's bill S-129 because it's laid dormant for most of a year. So I thought it'd be helpful for us to refresh our memories on what's there. And there's other fish and wildlife issues coming up. So getting back in the swing of things. Thanks. Senator McCormick, any other committee questions before we go on to the next bill introduction? Or Senator McCormick, any last remarks?
Yeah, thanks. Unless anyone else has a question. Yeah, I'll wrap it up. First of all, I've been scanning my emails. I have a list of the states that already have such a law, and I'll email that to the committee when I find it and what passes from my filing system. Yeah, let me just say that the chair, I think, correctly pointed out that the people of Vermont own the wildlife, and ownership carries with it certain prerogatives. It also carries with it certain responsibilities, and we are stewards of the wildlife. And in particular, I want to return to a point I made before, which is that trapping of fur-bearing animals for their furs is essentially a hobby. It's recreation. To the extent that it is a business, it has to do with, again, fashion. It is fairly, I would say, trivial. And that's, as a teacher of U.S. history, I'm often impressed by how much early American trade involved things like rum, sugar, tobacco, things that actually people didn't need. It was catering to the tastes of Europe. And this is something that I don't think that the serious side of trapping does not rise to the level of justifying again, to repeat myself, the gratuitous cruelty. So I thank the committee for considering the bill. I would say, I also want to stress that this has a great deal of popular support. Again, there are people who would like to testify. And I thank the chair and the committee for its time.
Thank you, everyone. With that, I want to welcome Senator Polina to the room. We have your bill, S-151, an act relating to the posting of land with paint markings. And the tradition. We're asking sponsors to come in, do a brief introduction. We'll do a walkthrough with Mr. O'Grady so we understand what's there. And we'd ask you as a sponsor to help us understand what made you decide to introduce this bill and kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm Anthony Felina. I represent Washington County in the Senate. This bill, I decided to introduce this bill after hearing from a number of constituents in my community and surrounding communities who are concerned about the difficulty they're having keeping their land posted as they get older, and also have people with disabilities. You probably understand that you have to post your land every year, you got to make sure that the trees are, that the posting is done in a certain way, certain signs being certain amount of feet among them, between them and whatnot. And a number of people came forward and said, you know, instead of having to do this every year, go tramping around my woods and trying to like make sure that I got the signs up in the right places, I'd like something that's more permanent and easier to do. So what this would allow them to do is to put purple stripe. I don't know if it has to be purple, to be quite honest, but it has purple stripes on trees within a certain distance from each other. And the markings would be permanent, and they would be able to go to the town clerk and register as posted land, but they wouldn't have to go back every year and repost it and look for signs that might be damaged by weather or being torn down for one reason or another. So it's basically an effort to make it easier for older people and people with disabilities to post their land without having to tromp around the land every year to make sure that the signs are posted adequately and in the right places. That's, I mean, that's it. It's pretty simple. I shouldn't use the word simple. It's pretty short.
You've invoked the curse of the symbol. All right. Okay, any committee questions before we get a walkthrough from Mr. O'Grady on the actual language to do that? All right.
I'm sure Mr. O'Grady will cover this, but it's interesting. I like the idea a lot. Just going to be looking for some guidelines there around how to what can be put on trees, written on trees. For example, there's someone in our community that is now putting sad faces on their trees with spray paint as an indicator that they don't want people to be on their property. And so that kind of thing, I'm hoping there's a way to avoid that, and that there would be some kind of consistent, respectful, elegant, dare I say, solution, which, knowing Senator Polina, is going to be what the bill says. So with that, Senator Polina, it's always great to see you. I'll be running my re-election campaign on this bill, and it's great and looking forward to learning more.
Before we hand it over to Michael, I would just agree with your concern about happy faces and whatnot on trees.
Right.
And
yeah,
the bill really does lay out pretty clearly where the marking should be, how many inches they should be, that kind of a thing. So it's basically a straight line of purple paint.
Yeah,
no,
it's interesting. It's been so disheartening, in all seriousness, to people in our community that people have gone this route, and putting, spray painting negative images and messages on trees. And there might even be a way to make sure that that doesn't happen with this bill. So with that, thanks. I appreciate you raising the issue.
I would also just mention quickly that I know the state of Maine has a similar law. I'm not sure, I forget whether there's one or two other states that have it, but the state of Maine has passed a similar law.
Okay, thanks.
And is theirs purple? Is theirs purple also?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, because the only similar thing that a lot of people mark their land boundaries with either bright orange or red.
Right.
And, yeah, so I'm just,
You don't want to mix it up.
Well, I don't want to mix it up, but purple seems to make sense to me, but
Senator, Mr. O'Grady, do you have a comment and then we do a bill walkthrough?
Sure. So this type of law is actually referred to as the purple paint law. There are many states that have enacted similar provisions: Maine, Kansas, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, Maryland, Missouri, Illinois. And those are just the ones that I looked up. To reference Senator Westman's point, there are a couple of states out west that have a bright orange requirement. But they usually also have a text requirement that the bright orange say no trespassing or something similar. And in those states with the purple paint provisions, there are specific requirements for how the paint is applied, where it's applied, elevation off the ground, etc. And it's working. It's been working in some states since the mid 2000s. So it is, as Senator Polina provided, usually included as an alternative to the signage, that the signage can still be posted, but this is just an alternative that people can use in order to reduce the time and effort in maintaining the boundary postings.
Sure. Well, I can certainly imagine how the boundary postings can be a bit burdensome. You can be far out in the woods, and then you come across a sign, and someone's got to be out there hiking, sometimes for miles, putting these things, whatever the proper posting distance is, 200 feet, something like that. I forget how often you have to do it. But I do have a basic question. I had someone ask me this just yesterday, and if you sell your property and the next landowner doesn't want to post, how do you unmark painted trees, was their question.
Well, that's a good question. The current provision of posting notice requires annual registration in the town offices. This bill would not require that for purple paint, but it's possible to work in something along those lines. Yeah, it's right now the bill would not require annual updating, but it doesn't specifically request or address transfer.
Okay.
So that is something I can look into and how other states deal with it. I haven't seen that, frankly.
Okay.
And I've looked at many of the other states.
Okay. Well, if you could start to look into that, that would be great, just because the beauty of the citizens legislature is you have a chance conversation with someone and they go, well, how does it work if you sell your property and the next person doesn't want to post? So thanks.
Vermont is a little bit unique though, because most of the other states use it as a way to provide no trespass, right? And this is not about no trespass. This is about posting for the purposes of hunting and fishing on land. And so there's only really one other state that I've seen with the purple paint law. It's Kansas, where it's put up to notify people that they don't have access for hunting or fishing. So I'm not really sure why I made this point, but it's really to note that in most other states it's for no trespass. Only in Vermont and Kansas that I've seen would it be for hunting and fishing.
Okay. I don't know if that means if Vermont is in any way unique in terms of its constitutional declaration that the wildlife belongs to the people of Vermont or something like that.
Well, I do find it interesting that there is that distinction, because I would have no way to post the land to say you can't come on. I don't want anybody on my land, but I could do the posting for wildlife. That's an interesting distinction.
It's a current distinction.
Yeah.
Just because you put up a posting sign for hunting and fishing doesn't mean that you posted for trespass. So
Brings up-
it's a
Senator McDonald?
Brings up the comment. It brings up the notion of purple haze.
Well,
Right. But that sounds like a perfect time to segue to the bill.
no, I would just say, I know a lot of people that don't like people hunting near their homes, and they put up permanent signs around, a piece of land around their homes, 10 acres around their homes, but they might own a lot more land than that. So it's interesting in that's created.
That's a great point, Senator Westman, because there is authority to set up what's called the safety zone around your house.
Yep, absolutely.
The safety zone is, I think it's limited to 500 feet, but I can double check that. But some of the posting requirements are about at the boundary of your property.
Yes, and that's right. And I look at this and say, if it's someone older that is physically not able to get out there, I don't know why we wouldn't let them post around their house.
Understood.
Okay. Well, once again, this is like one of those legislative experiences, Senator Polina. A quote unquote simple bill opens a door to a much more complicated conversation. So thank you for that. Let's walk through the bill and so we know how it does what it does.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
All right. So just the background, as we talked about in S201, the Constitution provides the inhabitants of the state with liberty and seasonal times to hunt and fowl on the lands they hold, and on other lands not enclosed under proper regulations to be made and provided by the General Assembly. Enclosed land and what constitutes enclosed land is set forth in 10 BSA 5201. And specifically, you go to the end of that section all the way at the end. I don't know why it's all the way at the end. It says land posted under this provision shall be enclosed for the purposes herein. So that's how you get enclosed land, by following the requirements of 10 BSA 5201. So a person having the exclusive right to take game upon lands or the waters therein, who desires to protect their land, can prohibit hunting or fishing on the land by maintaining notices. So the current standard of maintaining the notices of the 3 different ways that you can post that shooting, trapping, or taking of game or wild animals is prohibited or by permission only. Fishing or the taking of fish is prohibited or by permission only, or fishing, hunting, trapping, or taking a game is prohibited or is by permission only. What is being added is a second way to post that enclosure, that maintaining paint markings on trees, posts, or other objects, provided that the marking shall consist of one painted line of purple paint that is a minimum 8 inches long and 2 inches wide, and must be painted at between 3 to 6 feet above ground level, be painted on a tree post or other object that is visible to a person approaching the land, and comply with the requirements of subdivision B1. Now, subdivision B1 are the current spacing requirements and location requirements, siting requirements for posting. And this might be a place where Senator Westman, you might want to provide further authority. But right now, notices or paint markings prohibiting the taking of game shall be erected or painted upon or near the boundaries of land to be affected, with notices or paint markings at each corner and not over 400 feet apart along the boundaries thereof. So you still have the distance and siting requirements for the current posted notice. Then there's just conforming changes that the notice signs need to be legible and maintained. Another provision for the notice signs having to annually record in the town clerk's office. As I referenced earlier, the person posting lands with paint markings shall record the posting with the town clerk's office when the land is originally marked with paint, and shall not be required to update the notice annually. So that's, Senator Bray, where I need to look into your question of if the land is transferred, what is the effect of the purple posting on somebody that wants to allow hunting and fishing on that purple posted land. And that's really the end of the bill. The act would take effect on July 1, 2022.
So I was trying to keep up reading the details of on the current system with the yellow tags. Those are always, you annually update with town, but you also have to go out and put up fresh signs, correct? Dated signs each time. So
you don't see it here, but the signs are provided by the department annually, yes.
Right. So it also eliminates that requirement that you tour your property boundary and put up new signs every time. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So you see page 3, the notice signs must be legible and maintained at all times and shall be dated each year. All right, so you got to go out and date your signs, and the commissioner provides updated signs for posting.
Okay. Mr. O'Grady, have you participated in discussions in prior sessions, or any other senators here, in modifying that dating requirement? Because it also seems as though part of what it proves burdensome is getting back out there every year. And if they expire after a single year, that means you're out every year. I don't know.
I mean, the conversation about what is required to post is had at fairly regular intervals. And it's a it's a fairly predictable conversation. Those people who are property owners and have issues with having to be the ones that have the burden of telling people that they can't come onto their land or meeting the requirements, versus the people in the hunting, fishing, and trapping community who have a constitutional right and provide that they should be able to exercise that right unless a person is implementing validly the requirements under statute to enclose their land. It's a, I think you can all imagine the nature of the conversation. It's a pretty predictable, scenario.
Right. Okay. All right. Any other committee comments, questions? Senator Polina, anything you want to add now that you've heard this first round of discussion?
No, nothing to add really. I appreciate you taking the time to take a look at the bill, and if you have other questions, I'll try to find answers for you. If you're going to move it forward or hope to discuss it more, there are a couple of people I could recommend who might come in and talk to you about why they decided to support this direction. But I appreciate you folks taking the time to think it through.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you could send Jude and me the names of suggested possible witnesses, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Senator Westman?
Maybe Michael can help with it. Are all the laws that you've seen, Michael, just paint?
No, I mean, in most states, it's you can put up a sign or you can meet the warning provision with the paint. I think Pennsylvania's is a pretty short and kind of brief one. I can send you that if you would like.
That would be awesome. I just wondered in the question that Senator Bray brought up of if you paint the tree, what do you do with the next lander? I was wondering if there was tagging of trees or something else that someplace might have done.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of states. It's the ones that I'm thinking of that is about the tagging of the tree is they're out in the West. Idaho is the one that I'm thinking of specifically, and it's a little bit different because you have to have signage, but then you can use some paint for additional warning. Mm-hmm. So it's not one or the other. it's signage plus the ability to use paint. You know what? I'll send you like 4 or 5 links to 4 or 5 other states: Pennsylvania, Maine, Virginia, Kansas, North Carolina, Maryland.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Great. And Mr. O'Grady, could you also look into how we might extend this to safety zones so that, I mean, basically so that rather than the borders requirement, you're establishing an island of safety within your potentially much larger property in the same kind of user-friendly way by paint as opposed to sign.
Okay. You might want to look at that and go into the safety zone authority. I'll look at that and see if I can provide any recommendation on how to do that.
Okay, thanks very much. All right. Anything else on this first conversation? Great. Thank you, Senator Polina. Good to see you. And now we're
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Now we'll turn to our third introduction of the morning, and that is we're back to Senator McCormick is lead sponsor. We've talked a little bit about Act 250 already last week, and there are going to be at least three Act 250 related bills in the committee. And this is our first bite at the apple. This is S200, an act relating to Act 250 downtown master plan permits. Ms. Chakowski is here. Good morning. And Senator McCormick, you know the drill. What's the problem you're addressing or the opportunity you're seizing?
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to say that having worked on this for years, I have no particular proprietary position on this. I expect that this committee will pass out one Act 250 bill that will incorporate language from different bills, and I'm perfectly happy to have this language moved into a larger or different bill. What this is about is we have been facing a problem of housing. We need more housing. Building housing is development. We want our development to be downtown. That's first of all because it's best done downtown for a variety of reasons, infrastructure and so on, but also that it then relieves pressure on our countryside. That we would like to, if we're going to have development and the benefits of development, it should be concentrated. There is, going back to 1970, a claim made that Act 250 impedes legitimate development. Too time consuming, too expensive, too complicated. There's not a lot of evidence that that's actually the case. To the extent that it is, there could be reforms within Act 250 to how the process is conducted. In any case, what we have had for several years now have been proposals that to expedite downtown development, we should provide Act 250 exemptions. And I think that is a very bad idea because, first of all, it plays into the propaganda that Act 250 is bad for the economy. And using an Act 250 exemption as a reward, as an incentive, sort of implies, well, that's a benefit to not have Act 250. I think Act 250 serves the state and the particular community in which a development takes place, serves the community well, and it is not a benefit to not have it. However, we have heard from developers that developing housing is impeded by the permit process. So how do we address that problem without weakening Act 250? I see a model, and the model, and broadly, it is the model expressed in this bill. although Ellen Joukowsky will get into the technical, the structure of our law at present is complex enough that you can't just do what I'm suggesting. But the basic idea is to use planned unit development and industrial parks as a broadly defined model. And that is to say, in an industrial park, there is an Act 250 permit granted to the park based on those criteria that can be addressed regarding the park in general. Then when someone develops within the industrial park, they do not go for their own new Act 250 permit, they go for an amendment. And the amendment the process for getting the amendment would address those criteria that are not addressed in the umbrella permit. And indeed, when we look at, certainly in my case, representing Windsor County, my model is the Alcott Park in Wilder, but there are examples all over the state of umbrella permits and then subsequent development within a jurisdiction of the permit, of the umbrella permit, are amendments to that permit. It's not that simple because the way the law is structured, to do that, we would be using existing structures, and Ms. Joukowsky will hold forth on that. But in any case, I would think it would be a great, very sad and very destructive moment were we to start doling out Act 250 exemptions as rewards. Something like this was done about 20 years ago. And when I opposed it, I made a prediction. I said, if we pass, this was a downtown development bill that had an Act 250 exemption in it. And I said, if we pass this, I give John McClary 2 months to be doing an editorial in every paper in the state. Saying, well, they finally admitted it. Act 250 is bad for the economy. They want to jazz up the economy. They do it by weakening Act 250. See, we were right all along. Well, it took him about a week. And those editorials were out. So I don't want to yield on that point because I think it's not true that Act 250 is bad for the economy. But in any case, we do need to expedite downtown development. We need it for its own intrinsic value, and we also need to protect our forests for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that our forests are carbon sink, but that's not the only reason. And I think that part of that package is that we do need to expedite downtown development. I believe this does that. And I believe it does it without doing damage to our environmental law, our environmental land use protection law. I'll hand it off to staff who actually know what they're doing.
That's why we work with the lawyers, right? Okay, so thank you for that introduction. As for Act 250 not being sort of anti-business, that was one of Dean Davis's real concerns. And he actually, after his governorship, spent a fair amount of time collecting data to demonstrate that the economy continued to thrive even after the advent of Act 250. So, but you and Senator Campion know more about that than the rest of us, since you were on the Act 250 Commission. With that, though, it'd be good for us to know what the bill does. And so I'd like to turn to Ms. Joukowsky and ask her to walk us through that, please. Thank you.
Good morning, Ellen Joukowsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. Can you see the bill on your screen?
Yes.
S200. Okay, so I'm working with 2 screens this morning and it's not as easy as I thought it would be. Can you still see it?
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I should have practiced this because now I can't see. Apologies for a moment while I try to Oh my goodness.
Windows proliferation. I'm familiar with the confusion that can come with it. We can still see you and we can still see the bill, just so.
Okay. So this is S200, as Senator McCormick just discussed. It would allow a municipality to apply for a master plan permit for its designated downtown and or neighborhood development area. So the master plan permit process does already exist. And currently this process that I'm about to show you does exist for growth centers also. So currently under statute, growth centers are a designation that a municipality can seek. And currently municipalities that do have a growth center can apply for a master plan permit. So this would be extending that also to towns with designated downtowns and neighborhood development areas. And then at the end, there's some sections about some increase in funding related to this. So section 1 amends.
Sorry, quick question at the outset here. How many towns have designated growth centers?
Great question. I knew you were going to ask. There are currently 6 growth centers, and none of them have applied to use the master plan permit process.
Okay, and this provision to approach it this way is how long has it been in statute about?
Since 2005, so 17 years.
Thank you.
But there are significantly more designated downtowns. There are 23 downtowns, and then there are 9 neighborhood development areas.
Thank you.
So section 1 amends 10 VSA 6086B, which is a section in Act 250 that sets up a different expedited process for downtown designated downtowns. So we can talk about this section. We're not making any changes to it, but I'm adding this new master plan section to it because the concepts are related. So under this section of law that's not being changed, projects within downtowns can go through a findings and conclusion process, which is also a form of expedited permitting under Act 250. So we're not changing any of the language in that section, but later, farther down, so the new language is being added starting on line 13. Master plan permits. Any municipality within which a downtown development district or neighborhood development area has been formally designated pursuant to 24 VSA Chapter 76A may apply to the District Commission for a master plan permit for that area or any portion of that area pursuant to the rules of the board. Municipalities making an application under this subdivision are not required to exercise ownership or control over the affected property.
Ms. Shaheen, sorry to interrupt. The portion of the bill that you're citing isn't visible to us on the screen. I think
it's not. Is it now?
Not yet.
I might have to stop sharing. I'm having a hard time with the screen. What can you see?
It's showing us the bottom of page 1, line 19 currently.
Okay.
But
so I'm going to have to stop sharing because
that's okay, because Jude put the bill up on the website and distributed it to all senators via email this morning too. So
okay.
If you look for S200 in your inbox, that's what we're going through. Thank you.
Okay. So the process I just outlined, Senator McCormick did discuss. So this is the process that is used currently for industrial parks, and it's a similar process. The industrial park owner applies initially for a master plan permit before any of the subsequent units move in. The Act 250 process goes through and reviews the criteria that would apply to the entire park. Subsequent development for individual lots or businesses are made as amendments to that and use the findings on the individual criteria that have already been established by the District Commission So the individual project should only have to address a subset of criteria related to their specific lot.
I have sort of a simple-minded question around how that works practically. So if there's an industrial park and it has a certain amount of discharge to for the wastewater allotted to it, does the amendment basically just square up how much wastewater is the facility, the park currently producing, and would the addition of one more new tenant be within that allocation, or is that the kind of thing they're doing? They're just keeping track of the impacts to make sure that they don't exceed what was allowed for upfront in the master permit? Does that sound right?
Yes, I mean, I think, yes, I believe so. And you should hear from the NRB on the specifics of how this works, but an individual amendment should only need to address what they're doing that would differ from what has already been decided.
Okay, thank you.
And how that works practically in reference to what you were just talking about, I don't know. There should be a baseline set, and then the individuals address what their changes to the lot would do.
Thank you.
So the difference in this situation is that normally in an industrial park, the owner owns the entire park. The slight difference here is that a municipality doesn't actually own the land. But so that is just a small aside, but it's addressed in this language. Onto the top of page 3. So subsequent development within an individual lot within the area, subsequent development of an individual lot within the area of a master plan permit that requires a permit under this chapter shall take the form of a permit amendment, which is sort of what I just said, but spelling it out more clearly. In neighborhood development areas, subsequent master plan permit amendments may only be issued for development that is housing. So I don't know how much this committee has worked on the designation program, but designated downtowns are the core around a commercial center. They may include housing, especially if it's mixed use housing. But the neighborhood development areas are areas that go around the core commercial area and are primarily supposed to be for housing, residential. There may be commercial entities also, but it's primarily for housing. In approving a master plan permit and amendments, the district commission may include specific conditions that an applicant for an individual project will be required to meet. For a master plan permit issued pursuant to this section, an application for an amendment may use the findings issued in the master plan permit as a rebuttable presumption to comply with any applicable criteria under Act 250. So that is sort of just spelling out all of the things I also said. The Natural Resources Board has a rule on the procedure for master plan permits. It's Rule 21. So some of the things that aren't directly addressed in here, this would provide some specific benefits that aren't sort of mentioned. Municipalities in general don't pay Act 250 permit fees. And the master plan permitting structure is a little bit different. I would maybe want you to hear from the NRB on specifically how it works, but it is structured to go with the phases of development as opposed to how other permits work. Yeah.
Okay, and in terms of other permits, so in that master permit application, all the traditional A&R permitting on things like stormwater would apply, but they'd be basically obtained as part of gaining the gaining that master permit. Is that right? I mean, I'm thinking a little bit of how sometimes we hear concerns expressed or complaints, to be plain about it, around Act 250, but it turns out that Act 250 is merely requiring that all necessary A&R permits, for instance, or municipal permits have been obtained before they'll issue their permit. And it's not actually Act 250 proper that is the quote unquote problem at that moment. It's that they haven't gone and got a necessary permit from some other entity. So I'm just wondering if this process addresses that by part of getting a master permit means that all your other necessary permits to the degree applicable are obtained.
Yeah, so it's not different than regular Act 250 permitting. The criteria are the same. We're just talking about having the municipality do the upfront application as opposed to individual developers. And this situation, individual developers would apply for a permit amendment. And during that time, they would need to provide the evidence related to their specific application. And so if an individual developer within the municipality needs to get permits from A&R, that would be relevant to their application. But it would, at that point, it would only be a permit amendment. So we're not changing the Act 250 process other than individual developers under this proposal would only need to apply for a permit amendment as opposed to a full permit themselves.
Okay, great, thank you.
So sections 2 and 3 of this bill have to do with funding related to this proposal. So section 2 amends the Municipal and Regional Planning Fund. This is an existing fund in Title 24, Chapter 117, which is the Municipal and Regional Planning section related to zoning and planning. So there's this existing fund that ACCD awards grants every year to municipalities to assist them in their planning process. So this would be amending the terms of this fund, and the new language is on the top of page 5. So it would be allowing that the portion of the fund dedicated to municipalities, those funds could be used for applying for a master plan permit under this new language. So as I mentioned before, currently municipalities don't pay the actual Act 250 permit fee. However, there will be costs associated with creating an application for a master plan permit. As we sort of just mentioned, there are requirements that each criteria need sufficient evidence to demonstrate that you've met them. That part of it itself can be a cost to someone applying for a permit. So a classic example is criterion 5 is traffic related. And so often an applicant may need to conduct a traffic study. And so were you to pass this language as a municipality applying for a master plan, they could potentially get a grant to assist them with any consultants or studies that may need to be done to apply for a master plan permit. And then section 3 has 2 appropriations. So the sum of $300,000 is appropriated in 2023 to the Municipal and Regional Planning Fund to be distributed to municipalities in order to assist them with applications for master plan permits. So some initial funding potentially to encourage municipalities to use this process. And then B, the sum of $500,000 is appropriated to the Natural Resources Board to cover expenses associated with administering the new master plan permit for municipalities. So the Natural Resources Board is currently funded largely by permit fees. I'll have to check what the last amount was in the budget, but I think it's about 70% of their annual budget is covered by the permit fees they take in, and then they also do receive an appropriation. So there's general fund dollars that cover the remainder. As you exempt more entities from Act 250 or exempt the need for them to pay a permit fee, the amount of the NRB's budget goes down. And in this situation, because municipalities will not be paying permit fees, but there will be work for the NRB to do to review the master plan permits and issue them through the district commissions, this money would potentially cover that. And then finally, this bill will take will take effect on July 1, 2022.
Okay. Any committee questions at the moment for Ms. Chakowski? Right. I'd like to ask a little more on the appropriations section here. So 300,000 to the fund to support master plan permits. Do you know how that compares to the current funding, prior to this, if this bill does not pass, what did we give to that fund last year? I have no idea what the scale of this supplement is.
I knew you were going to ask that also. So currently, the municipal planning fund is funded by 17% of the property transfer tax. So I believe the number from last year was larger than normal. I feel like I heard a ballpark was around $500,000. I don't know off the top of my head the exact number, what it was previously. We can look at that in the budget, but this, so I don't know what it averages at, but I think it is, it's 17% of whatever the property transfer tax is for that year. And then the municipal portion of that.
The PTT just within that municipality or statewide?
Oh, no, sorry. So statewide, the property transfer tax, most of it goes to fund VHCB, as I think you know, but also 17% of it is carved off and it goes into this municipal and regional planning fund. Of that 17%, and this is on page 4 of your bill, I included all the language so that you could see the breakdown, but we're not changing any of it. So currently 10% goes to the Vermont Center for Geographic Information, 70% goes to ACCD to pay performance contracts for the regional planning commissions, and then 20% goes to the municipalities to assist them in their planning efforts. And those take the form of municipal planning grants. I do think they are on average a smaller sort of grant. The municipalities seek them to assist in like specific processes when they're going through a bylaw update or ordinance changes. So I don't have the exact figures. I think Chris Cochran could come in here and tell you some specifics on how that grant fund works.
All right, so we'll do that. And then the 500,000 to the NRB to cover expenses associated. So now that I better understand the scale of what the current allocations have been, what's the thinking, I mean, behind that number? For instance, what additional expenses would the NRB be facing? I'm not saying in any way that I'm concerned about overfunding the NRB. I think they actually were running in the red until we did $1 million appropriation last year. And I feel like they've been running a little bit on a starvation budget. So all for funding them fully, but I'm just trying to figure out why 500,000 to support this statutory change and the programmatic impacts that might go with it.
I don't know if Senator McCormick wants to weigh in on this. So if you're trying to incentivize a number of towns by providing up to $300,000 in grants, I'm not really sure how many applications that could be. It could be $50,000 per grant, and that would be 6 towns applying for master plan permits. Those permits, all the work on those permits would not be necessarily covered by any permit fees for the district commissions. I don't know the financials on this. This is a new idea. I don't have any idea how much these grants would cover. But that's I don't know. That is an amount of money. You can change it or leave it. I do think there also was the recognition that the NRB has been running a deficit.
Right. Okay, well, great. And I realize that I don't want to get, I'm not trying to be overly picky on details. I'm just trying to understand where some of the numbers are coming from. So I have a big picture question if there are no committee questions yet. And I don't see any, and that is, so it sounds like there is, in terms of there's that growth centers have been able to do something akin to this since 2000 for the last, whatever, 16 years. And, but that none have stepped forward to do it as best you're aware. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I don't know if this is maybe a question I should be asking Senator McCormick. Senator McCormick, in bringing this proposal forward, did you have a sense of why, you know, I'm an optimist at heart, but I'm wondering why, if this is similar to a proposal that no one's availed themselves of in the last 16 years, why this one might be more a better version of it. So what do you see going on there, and how do you think this might work?
Well, my sense is that they ought to have taken advantage of it. And if the argument is that, you know, we're all for smart development, we're all for environmentally responsible development, we just want to streamline the process, well then, here is a streamlined process. There is, it's not for me to speculate on other people's motives, but I do note that some people actually, going back to 1970, really don't want to make adjustments in their development plans out of deference to the environmental values protected by the Act 250 process.
Okay.
So the idea is if this is what you say you want, here it is. To a certain extent, maybe that's calling somebody's bluff, but only to the extent that it is a bluff. I think there are people who are actually quite sincere that they want to do it and they want to do it right. And this provides that opportunity.
Right. Do you know if in the industrial park version of this, if there were grants available to help people take on the work required to make this, maybe you might call it a more demanding or sophisticated application?
Ellen, you look like you were gonna.
I
don't think
I
there
would
were.
disagree that
I
it's a
don't think-
more demanding application.
Yeah.
I think potentially it could be like, so a lot of the ski areas have master plan permits. And if their permit application is more complicated, it's due to the nature of their proposal, being a large phase development with different kinds of aspects. I don't know if anyone would characterize the industrial park master plan as a more complicated. I think, I don't know if I've heard that.
Okay.
I think in some ways,
format.
I think in some ways the master permit, the umbrella permit is simpler because it's first of all, it doesn't deal comprehensively with all the details. That comes up when there are petitions for amendments. That's
All right.
what
Thank
you have is a broadly defined permit, and now you start to zero in on the details when someone wants to do something there.
Right. Well, yeah, and I'm not trying to poke any holes in this. I'm just trying to see why we offered something that didn't seem that there wasn't a very good take rate for, and then what we might learn from that to improve the take rate on this strategy. Senator McDonald.
Folks might be interested in reading Green Manhattan, which was, if you Google it, it talks about this bill started with housing. And the first thing was to restrict the area where housing was being built to housing alone. And once you do that, you are generating automobile traffic. If you're looking for designated downtowns, you want places where people can walk from where they live to where they work to where they shop. And when you start designating that it's housing only, you are generating automobile traffic in your downtowns from one part of the downtown to the next, or to the strip outside of the town to go shopping. Green Manhattan is a good read if you wish to look at the unintended consequences of a variety of activities.
All right. Thank you for that.
That's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you for that recommendation. I did chase down your last week's recommendation about the size of SUVs and trucks compared to tanks, and it's surprising how neatly, other than
Pickup trucks.
weight, pickup trucks, yeah. It's surprising how close the average new pickup truck is in size to a literal Sherman tank. Might weigh a lot less and shorter in some ways, but okay. All right, so anything more on terms of the bill that you would like to make us aware of, Ms. Chakowski?
No,
Okay. Senator McCormick, anything more you want to chip in?
I think I've said my piece, and Ellen, Ms. Chakowski did an excellent job.
Okay.
I'm done.
So I think it'd be helpful for us to follow up and find out more about this funding. I don't want to, I had heard, but it was just anecdotal. I don't know that it's reliable information. There's a lot of mythology that seems to float around Act 250 or received wisdom that I'm not so sure it's always wisdom, but that some people thought this option was, burdensome enough that they weren't going to take it up without assistance. And so I think it's good that you're putting money in to help people have the assistance they might need in order to do the planning and assessment work, for instance, a traffic study or whatever, to be able to afford to make it affordable or more attractive to a municipality to consider the option. I'm also encouraged that there's funding for the NRB itself. Okay. Any committee questions for council or for the sponsor? All right. So thank you, Ms. Chakowski. I think we're finished on our bill walkthrough. So we do have two other Act 250 bills I